I now invite the panelists on the stage. Ms. Astha Arora. Ms. Astha Arora is a public health and nutrition specialist with over 15 years of experience advancing health programs across South Asia and East, Central, and West Asia. Dr. Dhruba Purkayastha is a sustainable development and climate finance expert with over 30 years of experience across international development policy and finance. Dr. Mukund Rajan is a chairperson of eCube Investment Advisors, a pioneering platform launched in 2019 to catalyze ESG transformation in corporate India. Ms. Huma Kazi is a strategic policy and ESG advisory professional with deep experience in environmental disclosure, transition finance, and global sustainability governance. And our wonderful moderator for the day, Ms. Swati Shah Gupta, Head of ESG and Sustainability at Fireside Ventures. A warm round of applause for the wonderful panelists and our moderator. Thank you.
Audible? Hello? Yes. Great. I know, very cliched statement. The post-lunch sessions are always the hardest, and we are breaking into that. But I have absolutely no doubts that everybody who has stepped into the room by cutting short their lunch, it will be worth their while. Yes, I am overjoyed, overwhelmed to see the amazing panelists here. And you would be a little surprised that we didn't really do the long introductions, specifically because it's not just about what we're respectively doing today in our respective roles, but also a reason and the journeys which hopefully will help the audience understand of what are we doing here today and why do we relate to the topic of money in green financing, especially from the women entrepreneurs context better. So before I jump into setting the context, I want to invite each of the panelists to talk about their journeys, their motivations to be here today in this panel. Mukund, would you like to start?
Sure. Thank you so much. And first of all, thank you to the organizers for putting together this wonderful day and wonderful panel. Delighted to be here, honored to be invited here. So in terms of my climate journey, it goes back at least 30 plus years, which gives you a sense of my age. I first looked at the politics of the environment and the politics of climate change and other global environmental issues when I was researching for my master's and my doctorate at Oxford University. Before that, I was an engineer from IIT Delhi, and I think climate was my way of trying to show the connect between politics and technology and engineering, and I thought environment and the science behind climate issues would explain and justify my selection of a thesis topic. I then came back to India and joined the Tata Group, where I worked for the next 2.5 decades. And towards the end of my stint with the Tatas, I was part of the Group Executive Council with responsibility for the Tata brand. And because of that, I was given responsibility for both ethics and sustainability, because these have been important pillars of the way in which the Tata brand has been built. And I think one of the pivotal events for Tatas and for myself in seeing how far this journey had come was an event that took place, I think, 2015, when Norges Bank, the Norwegian sovereign wealth manager, divested their holdings in Tata Power because the company was at that time entirely predicated on producing energy from coal-fired thermal power. And they were decarbonizing their portfolio. And so it showed us in Tata's how quickly the agenda was shifting and how investors are beginning to make calls on their investments based on who was more climate friendly and who was not. In 2018, I left the Tatas to start my own company called eCube. And we have a number of interventions going on at eCube. We call the company eCube based on 3 E's: engage and empower for ESG. The most recent initiative we have launched, and love to talk about that with some of you in this room later, is a private equity fund focused on supporting with growth capital, so slightly later than early stage investing, companies that have exciting climate-related solutions, both in the decarbonization space, but also for larger companies that may be pivoting or modifying their processes or trying to address new standards in India and in export markets like Europe. So delighted to be here once again, and thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you so much. Astha?
Hi, everyone. I'm a public health and nutrition expert. I work with the Asian Development Bank. My journey is slightly different than many of my panelists. I come from a public policy lens. So I've studied nutrition, then I studied public health, realized wanted to work in public policy, was in Australia, came back here, worked with UNICEF. So worked on the ground in Orissa as a district coordinator for child health and nutrition. Learned that everything that I'd studied in my master's during public health, from Ottawa Charter to whatnot, did not make sense because the field realities were very different. So really, I think that was my job, where I learned how the ICDS system works, how the Anganwadi worker works, where none of the behavior change theoretical models can be applied as is. From there, I worked there for a few years, worked in consulting for about 8 years thereafter, worked with the government of India for conceptualizing the PMJ health insurance scheme, then worked with the World Bank, and now working with the Asian Development Bank. So really, public policy and then development bank lens is what I get here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Astha. Huma?
Hello, everyone. First of all, thank you for having us for this esteemed panel discussion. And I'm Huma Safkazi. I lead advisory and strategy at Octa CSG. So we are a global company that looks into enablement of sustainable finance and climate and ESG risk transition across financial institutions. The three stakeholders that we work with are primarily the government, multilateral development banks, and financial institutions, not just in India, but worldwide. And since our inception, we have completed successfully around 33 projects across different geographies, spanning to, if the number is right, it's around 19 to 20 geographies now. So a bit about myself. Like Astha mentioned, I'm also a public policy enthusiast. So I began my career sometime back in 2013 or 2014 with in international relations with Ministry of Commerce and Industry, where I worked with very closely with international experts, government policy stakeholders, on the India's bilateral and multilateral trade relations with at international forums such as India, Korea, Japan, SEPA, India, Korea, Japan, China, Taiwan, Hong Kong, all the Northeast Asian countries. And then I pivoted my career to climate finance and sustainable finance back in 2018. And that was a time when everything around the world was picking up in sustainable finance, because EU, UK, they have all taken out their taxonomies, the sustainable finance framework at the same time. So then I joined UNDP, and then I was deputed in a Ministry of Finance, worked very closely again with the policy stakeholders or the regulators in advancing India's sustainable finance architecture at different platforms such as G20 Sustainable Finance Working Group, Climate Corps, and GEF, GCF. And then after that, I worked very closely with Carbon Disclosure Project on the disclosure mainstreaming and spearheading the sustainable finance vertical, not at just India level, but also at global level. Again, working with G20 SFWG, had also been a co-chair of the T20 task force on ESG-related metrics around Brazil presidency back in 2023. So that has been a very good journey, and now at the advisory role at Octa CSG. So yeah, that's a bit about me, my journey in sustainable finance.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Pleased to be here. Very happy, known Swati for a couple of years. Broadly like Mukund, 30 plus years, roughly divided into private, corporate, public policy, which has been with the government, or rather World Bank Group. And then for the last 10 years, I've drifted into climate. Over the last 10 years, I've been with international and domestic non-profit institutions, trying to figure out in climate finance as to how to profit from climate. That's why I'm here. So worked with non-profit for the last 10 years, and the objective of figuring out how to profit from this animal called climate. Let's see what we do.
How to profit from climate. Amazing. I love that the way this round of introductions is ending. I feel a lot of panel discussions land up somehow telling you maybe some market trends, which you can kind of Google and read some reports and look up as well. But I specifically want to do these round of introductions. So you will hear the words MDB, DFIs, government, policy, a lot in these introductions, which is the reality of the space today, which is where the significant amount of capital and intelligence really resides. But the room here is ideally looking for maybe fundraising from the private sector as well. So both the challenges are equally important. How do you navigate the space of public financing and, if at all, MDB financing at some stage, whether indirectly or directly? Or if you are looking at that fraction of capital coming through the private sector lens, how do you access that as well? So we will try and decode that conversation a bit today, and sincerely request, I think, the audience to reach out to the individuals to learn on how to navigating these spaces well as well. I'll talk about my journey a little later because I really want to talk about some really hard facts today. So India attracted $31 billion in climate financing in 2024. $31 billion, which looks so optimistic. It's such a large scale. But then I thought that, why are we really struggling for people in this room on raising the capital, right? Like, why is the capital access so difficult? So we try to break it down. Only 30% of this is in the form of equity. Now you further divide this into public markets and private markets. For those who are not very savvy with the terms, public markets are your IPOs and the listed shares. And private equity is what looks like venture capital, startup fundraising, etc. As well. So if you break down that 30% further, only 40% of that actually came through the private markets. Let's further break it down by gender. Right? So only 12% of that actually got allocated to women. So that $31 billion large figure that we were talking about would come down to maybe some single digit, less than 5% sort of amount. That is the target that people in this room are looking for. The beautiful part is that the scale and the base is so high and it's only getting higher. So even that single digit percentage is still very large. So let's figure out on how to, pull up our socks, tighten our belts, and ensure that that capital reaches this room as smoothly and as frictionless as possible. So my question, therefore, that yes, the numbers look strong, but how do we really decode this space for early stage ventures? So we also know that most of the early checks in this space would come from grants, angel investing, etc. And most of that, especially in climate financing, is also going towards maybe the more traditional, well-established spaces, which is energy transition, electric mobility. A lot of entrepreneurs in this room also come from the sectors like waste, agri, renewables. So my question is, what are the most realistic 2 to 3 entry points that early stage climate ventures can look for in India? The answer can be as simple, as complicated as you would like. So I'll throw the question open to the panel and whoever would like to go for it first. Rupa, maybe you can start and then we can take it from there.
Okay, thanks. Okay, let me take a question, something like climate ventures. So you mean capital to private climate ventures.
Right.
You know what, I mean, just for the benefit for all of us, I would like to kind of get the climate venture part right, in the sense, you know what, climate is often confused in many ways. I mean, I think one of your sort of questions is climate, green, sustainable. You have a lot of. A business on climate is only and only that business which has a direct contribution to reduction of carbon dioxide, because 99%, the rest 1% is methane and other short-lived. But I'm basically making it clear that any climate venture needs to bring in a direct reduction in the emissions which would have otherwise happened. And the second climate business is clear carbon dioxide removal. The third part of climate venture is adaptation. And in adaptation, there is a lot of understanding of adaptation and private businesses. I understand a lot of people would differ for me, primarily in the non-profit and the policy space, but adaptation is about coping up, saving people, more water, more heat, more floods, more winds, more snow. Very unlikely to have any private business solving that problem. 90% of it is a public problem. Now, therefore, the answer to your question is, what is an early stage venture in and for a VC? A VC is like a casino player. The difference is you're betting in 35, but you're expecting, if you distribute your bets in 35, but the one, instead of giving just about a double return, that VC needs to make an exceptional return on one out of that 35, where that P is happy with distributing cash and investments where there is a potential for growth. So the critical part to be understood for early, I'm not bringing in right now the gender lens, but I'll come in with the gender lens subsequent. We'll talk about the gender lens later. But therefore, it's important to understand what the VC is looking for and what the PE is looking for. It's important to understand that there is change in technology. If there is change in technology, change in energy production, change in carbon dioxide removal, these are climate businesses which will grow, fund themselves, and VCs will come in. VCs will come in if there is a business enterprise which shows. But the crux of the problem lies because we are trying to look at climate, and it is rightly so, it's a public problem. That's why I said I need to profit from a problem that is climate, which will have to be solved by the public sector, by the policy. And that leads to emergence of new product markets. That's where exactly private ventures and venture capital should come in and would come in. Thank you.
Got it. So my takeaway one is to be on the safe side. If you want to call yourself a climate venture, then as tangibly as possible, being able to show carbon-related outcomes is very important. However, you may be an adjacent startup as well, which is working, let's say, largely in the sustainability or the environmental space. So let's keep that conversation maybe a little wider and not use the term climate ventures as loosely, right? So let's agree on that. That brings me beautifully to the next question for Huma. Because today the terms climate finance, ESG investing, impact investing, transition financing is all used interchangeably. So maybe we can figure a way of decoding that a bit for the audience as well. And should a venture aim for one or the other? And how do you fit your narrative to suit what the fund may be looking for as well?
Thank you, Swati. That's a very good question. And I think the distinction for the founders at the very beginning is not that difficult, because if you look at different jargons, you can get a little bit confused. But the climate finance, basically, if your business products, services, your solutions, they're trying to address, like Dhruva sir mentioned, if you're trying to address the climate challenge, then definitely climate finance is something, it's something that you should be targeting as a pool. In terms of impact investing, that can be a very broader space. So if you're looking at, at the measurable impacts, beyond financial returns in terms of environmental returns or in terms of social returns, then you need to be able to articulate your impact, in terms of these three different returns to the investor. Transition finance can be a bit niche topic, because if your company, your business model is trying to look at decarbonizing hard to abate sector and carbon intensive sectors, for example, like steel, cement, etc., to enable them to transition into the sustainability journey, then I think that would be called something in transition finance space. ESG investing, I would say something that the early stage founders, they don't need to obsess over like very early on, because until unless you are like really large and you're actually reporting to the institutional investors, you don't need that. As a founder, what you need to focus on is to clearly map out the narrative of your business and what we're actually trying to solve. It is if you are trying to address a climate challenge, if you are trying to bring about a transition of the different hard to abate sectors, or if you are trying to actually map out a measurable impact in terms of social and environmental, going beyond financial returns, of course. So I think at the beginning it is pretty simple, and this will and if you have a clear definite map and idea around what you are trying to solve, then you will also be able to align with the right kind of investors, right kind of capital sources. So
Yeah.
that's
So again, my takeaway is that get your story right, and then you will find the right audience. So I don't think working backwards that this is the flavor of the season, and then calling yourself X or Y doesn't really help. Maybe the investors have that luxury, but I guess the entrepreneurs don't. Mukund, I just want to invite your comments on this as well. Yeah.
I just wanted to share my own experience with the private equity fund. There have been occasions when we've gone to LPs and they've said, okay, you're a fund operating the space of climate positivity. We're actually linking some of the carried interest for the team to outcomes on climate impact, speaking to Ruba's point about reducing carbon emissions in the portfolio companies we invest in. So, oh, you're looking at impact. Okay, so we have this site pool, which is our foundation. We'll send you there. They said, no, this is commercial. We're looking at profitability. We will be benchmarked to the best in the business. We are not an impact fund that is looking for grant funding or philanthropic funding. So sometimes it's important to understand, as you rightly said, what is the motivation of the investor you're in front of and what they are presenting themselves as. Are they philanthropic capital, grant capital, government subsidies, who knows? Yeah. But just make sure you've read up and understood fully where they are coming from, and then pitch yourself accordingly. That possibly in the early stage especially, and especially if you are not 100% certain yet, and you're doing it partly out of passion rather than necessarily clarity on what's going to transpire at the end of your journey, maybe you want to be before both buckets. Maybe there are people who are willing to, ensure you make a decent return, but will give you support from a grant pool. Maybe there are others who won't, when you just want a clear sense of what are going to be the returns in this business, and if it doesn't meet the returns threshold, they will not fund you. But from your own perspective, maybe early on, either if you have clarity, great. If you don't, always in any case, make sure you know what the investor is looking for, and then pitch accordingly. By the way, just one additional point, going back to your earlier statistics, there's one statistic that we came up with when we were researching the space in the early stage. It's also a fact, I believe, that 9 out of 10 investments that take place in companies, those companies aren't able to raise a subsequent round of funding. Yep. And therefore, I don't want to alarm all of you who've taken the initiative to do something in this room, but it's not an easy journey. So apart from the fact that, you have to get before the right investors, many will fail. And that's part of the, in a sense, the risk, but also the adventure of what you've embarked upon.
Yep. So there's a weird kind of telepathy going on this panel, because that's my next question. And that's for you, Mukund, as well. That, so I heard this term, it's a horrible term, but I heard this term in my impact investing class that I was attending recently. It's called as the Valley of Death, which is specifically aimed for impact-focused commercial startups. That you get, your initial seed round, you possibly even do Series A, and then there is this blank black hole that you don't know how to overcome. Since you are, private equity funds, so clearly, come at later stages. And if you could use some examples, what are the kind of organizations? What did they do right that they managed to reach your portfolio? What does it take for an entrepreneur to cross this valley of death and then survive and thrive?
That's the, I guess, the secret sauce we're all looking for. I think in many cases that you see, not necessarily all, but in many cases, I think one of the things that stands out is perseverance. You need, as I mentioned, there's a huge amount of risk involved in this space. And therefore, the willingness to be out there every day trying to make sure your product or your service makes a success of itself in front of a whole bunch of people who could potentially fund you, many of whom will shut the door on you. Having those conversations and continuing